You aren't going, Ava. Put the passport back in your drawer and start defrosting the Wagyu for the Dobermans. Someone with actual value needs to be on that jet. And frankly, you're just the help with a shared last name. The room went bone-chillingly silent. My father, Harrison, didn't even look up from his vintage Bordeaux as he shattered my dignity in front of 40 of Manhattan's elite. He said it with a casual, practiced cruelty, his voice carrying easily over the soft jazz playing in our Upper East Side penthouse. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the roar of blood in my ears. I felt the heat crawling up my neck, a familiar burn of indignity that had been smoldering for 3 decades. I looked around the table. Crystal glasses shimmered under the $200,000 chandelier, and faces that I had known my whole life suddenly felt like masks in a horror movie. My sister, Chloe, let out a sharp, jagged laugh. She leaned back in her velvet chair, adjusting a diamond necklace that cost more than most people's homes. A necklace I knew, for a fact, was purchased with laundered funds I had personally scrubbed clean 3 months ago. She was 28, 2 years younger than me, yet she sat there like a queen regent. "You heard him, Ava," Chloe smirked, checking her reflection in a silver spoon with a sickening level of vanity. "The Aspen trip is for the inner circle. Nathaniel and I need the master suite anyway for our anniversary content. You'd just be in the background of my photos looking, well, like you always do. Stressed and plain. Besides, the twins' humidifier needs to be set to exactly 65%, and the dogs won't eat if the maid does it. They need a family member to serve them. That's your job." Nathaniel, her husband, gave a mock sympathetic shrug, though his eyes were cold. At 32, he was a shark who used our family name to lure unsuspecting investors into his shell companies. "Don't take it personally, Ava. It's just logistics. We need a reliable, warm body at the estate while we're hitting the slopes. Think of it as a staycation. You love this house, don't you? You spend more time with the Ledgers than with people anyway." I looked at them, the triumvirate of my misery. Harrison, the media mogul, Chloe, the vapid influencer, and Nathaniel, the predator in a Tom Ford suit. They saw a doormat. They saw a quiet accountant who fixed their mathematical errors in the dead of night. The humiliation tasted like copper. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the mahogany table and send the expensive china screaming onto the Persian rug. But I didn't. I forced my hands to stay still. "I understand," I said, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. "Good girl," Harrison grunted, finally looking at me. His eyes were like flint. "And before we leave for Teterboro Airport tomorrow, I want the Q4 projections for the Sterling account finished. There's a $150,000 discrepancy that needs to disappear. Make it happen, Ava, or don't expect your allowance next month. Remember whose signature is on those returns. If this ship goes down, you're the captain of the paperwork. I'm just the passenger." Allowance. He called the pittance he paid me to manage a multi-billion-dollar fraud an allowance. He was reminding me that he had set me up, making sure my name was on every incriminating document while his remained pristine. In that moment, something inside me crystallized. The anger became a professional cold audit. "I'll make sure everything is handled exactly the way it deserves to be, Father," I said, forcing a smile. "That's the spirit," Nathaniel chimed in, raising his glass. "To family loyalty." I watched them toast, unaware that they had just handed the keys of the kingdom to the woman they had spent years torturing. They thought they were locking me in a cage. They didn't realize they were locking themselves out. The silence of the penthouse after they left for Teterboro Airport wasn't empty. It was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and the lingering echo of their demands. I stood in the center of the foyer, watching the red taillights of the limousine fade into the Manhattan traffic. For the first time in 5 years, the air felt breathable. They thought they had trapped me. To them, I was just a domestic appliance with a heartbeat, a creature that existed to fix Chloe's social scandals and manage Nathaniel's investment disasters. But as I turned the heavy brass bolt on the front door, I felt a surge of electric anticipation. The servant was gone. The auditor was in the building. I didn't go to the kitchen to defrost Wagyu. I walked straight into Harrison's private study, a room that smelled of old leather and the arrogance of a man who believed he was above the law. I sat in his oversized mahogany chair and looked at the 3 monitors that served as the nerve center of the Sterling Empire. To the world, Harrison was a visionary. To me, he was a clumsy criminal who was terrible at math. 5 years ago, when the IRS first started sniffing around his construction shell companies, he hadn't hired a top-tier law firm. Firms ask questions. Instead, he had turned to me, the daughter he had always called the quiet one, and told me it was my duty to save the family. I remembered that night vividly. He had poured me a glass of cheap wine and told me that if I didn't help him reorganize the books, we would lose everything. I did it because I thought I was earning a seat at the table. I thought if I worked hard enough, he would finally look at me with pride. Then came the Ava liability email 3 years ago. I had been shredding documents late at night when a notification pinged on Harrison's open laptop. It was a thread between him and Nathaniel. "Don't worry about Ava," Harrison had written. "She's too terrified to leave and lacks the social grace to survive without us. She's cheaper than a firm, and more importantly, she's our insurance. Every offshore transfer has her digital footprint. If the feds ever knock, we claim she went rogue. She's the perfect scapegoat, plain, forgettable, and legally responsible." I hadn't cried. I had sat in the blue glow of the monitor, feeling a cold, metallic clarity wash over me. I wasn't his daughter. I was his human shield. That was the night I stopped fixing their mistakes and started documenting them. Now, I pulled a small, encrypted black drive from my pocket. For 3 years, I had been building a digital archive of their crimes. Every time I disappeared a discrepancy, I kept the original record. Every time Nathaniel used corporate funds to pay off his gambling debts, I saved the wire transfer. I began the mirror copy of Harrison's hidden partition. The progress bar crawled across the screen, green and steady. While it downloaded, I opened the filing cabinet with the key Harrison had arrogantly handed me. I found the Sterling Q4 folder. Inside, it wasn't just a $150,000 discrepancy. It was a $1.2 million trail of tax evasion, disguised as consulting fees for Chloe's non-existent marketing firm. She was buying Birkin bags with money that should have been going to state infrastructure. "You wanted me to be creative with the ledgers, Father," I whispered to the empty room, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm going to be a goddamn masterpiece." I didn't just copy the files. I began preparing the whistleblower package. I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to erase their world. By the time the download hit 100%, I had enough evidence to put Harrison and Nathaniel away for at least 15 years. By 4 a.m., the penthouse was still. The Dobermans were asleep in the mudroom, unfed. I stood by the window, looking out at the New York skyline. They were in Aspen, probably drinking champagne by a fire, laughing about how they had contained me. They had no idea that the foundation of their mountain was already turning to ash. I wasn't a captain going down with a sinking ship. I was the one who had just opened the hull. The morning of their departure for Aspen had been a masterclass in entitlement. Chloe had screamed for 20 minutes because her vintage Hermes scarf was buried under a pile of cashmere. Nathaniel had nursing a hangover that smelled of top-shelf bourbon, while Harrison tossed IRS notices onto my desk like they were trash. They left me with a long list of chores and a locked front door, convinced I would spend the week obediently scrubbing their crimes. By the second day of their paradise, I was done. I stood in the foyer of the empty penthouse, my bags packed, not with the polyester blends they expected me to wear, but with high-end essentials I'd slowly acquired over the years, hidden in the back of the guest cottage. I looked at the marble island, where Chloe had left her binder of humidifier and dog instructions. It looked pathetic now, a relic of a life I was about to incinerate. I took the brass key to the filing cabinet and set it right on top of that binder. Next to it, I placed a yellow sticky note. I wrote 4 words that felt better than any scream. Consider this my resignation. I didn't call a family car. I called a private valet service to pick up my 10-year-old sedan, and then I took an Uber to JFK. I didn't head to the economy lot. I walked straight to the first-class counter for a direct flight to San Francisco. "Heading out for business or pleasure, Ms. Sterling?" the gate agent asked, looking at my ticket. I adjusted the strap of my laptop bag, the one containing the black drive that held 15 years of federal felonies. "Business," I said, my voice cold and sharp. "Strictly business." The flight was 6 hours of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. While the rest of the cabin slept or watched movies, I was on the in-flight Wi-Fi, sending the first anonymous tip to the IRS whistleblower office. I attached 3 years of Harrison's double-booked ledgers and a detailed map of Nathaniel's offshore shell companies. I hit send just as we crossed over the Rockies. It felt like dropping a match into a pool of gasoline. When I landed in San Francisco, the air was misty and smelled of salt, a far cry from the suffocating luxury of the Upper East Side. I went straight to my Aunt Teresa's design studio in the Mission District. Teresa was the only one in the family who had escaped Harrison's gravity. She was a world-class architect who had been cut off for refusing to help Harrison launder construction materials 20 years ago. "Ava," she said, her eyes widening as I walked into her sleek, glass-walled office. She didn't see the plain girl Harrison described. She saw a woman with a fire in her eyes that could level a city. "You finally did it." "Finally did. I didn't just leave, Teresa," I said, setting the laptop bag on her desk. "I brought the evidence. They think I'm at home feeding the dogs. By the time they realize I'm gone, the feds will already be freezing the accounts." "They'll come for you," she warned, her voice low. "Harrison doesn't lose. He just gets louder." "Let him come," I replied, a dark smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "I've spent 30 years learning how he thinks. He's not powerful, Teresa. He's just leveraged, and I just pulled the lever." I spent the next 48 hours in a blur of motion. While my family was posting photos of themselves skiing in Aspen with captions like #FamilyFirst and #SterlingLegacy, I was sitting in a secure room with a federal investigator I had contacted months prior. I explained everything. I showed them the page problem email. I showed them the signatures Harrison had forged in my name. I watched the investigator's face turn from professional skepticism to absolute shock. "You realize this will destroy them," the investigator said, leaning back. "There's no coming back from this. Your father, your sister's husband, they're looking at significant prison time." "I'm not the one who committed the crimes," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just the one who stopped hiding them. If the ship is sinking, it's because Harrison built it out of rot." That night, I stayed at a hotel overlooking the Bay Bridge. I turned off my phone, but I knew what was coming. The paradise in Aspen was about to become a crime scene. The cold exile I had lived in for 30 years was finally over. Now, it was their turn to feel the chill. 2 days later, I stood in the center of Aunt Teresa's design gallery in San Francisco. The space was a cathedral of glass and steel, filled with the city's elite for a private exhibition. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wearing a polyester blend or a servant's apron. I was wearing a structural silk gown in charcoal gray, a gift from Teresa. I held a glass of vintage champagne, my back straight, my head held high. "You look like you belong here," Teresa whispered, squeezing my arm. "No one would ever guess you spent a decade filing receipts for a construction fraud." I smiled, but the warmth didn't reach my heart. I was waiting. I knew Harrison's ego. I knew that once he returned to an empty penthouse and a resignation note, he wouldn't call the police. He would track me down himself to put me in my place. The double doors at the front of the gallery didn't just open. They burst apart with a violence that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. The music died instantly. Every head in the room turned. Standing in the doorway were Harrison and Nathaniel. They looked like a car crash in a museum. They were still wearing their aspen ski jackets stained with sweat, their faces peeling with angry red sunburns. But they weren't alone. Flanking them were high, massive men in dark tactical gear, private security contractors Harrison hired when he wanted to hurt someone without leaving a police report. "Ava!" Harrison's voice boomed, vibrating with a primal animal rage. He stormed into the room, his boots clattering on the polished concrete. "You thieving little bitch!" The guests gasped, pulling back as Harrison's guards blocked the exits. Nathaniel looked even worse. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking. He pointed a finger at me, screaming so loud his veins turned purple. "She stole it! She stole $150,000 in diamonds from the safe and the hard drives! She's a criminal! Call the police!" Nathaniel yelled at the horrified crowd, trying to paint me as the villain to cover the stench of his own panic. Harrison reached me, his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale bourbon on his breath. "Give me the drive, Ava. Right now. Or I swear to God, you won't walk out of this building. You think you're smart? You're a secretary. You're nothing." I didn't flinch. I didn't even set down my champagne. I looked him right in the eye, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel a flicker of fear. I felt pity. "I didn't steal your diamonds, Harrison," I said, my voice amplified by the sudden silence of the room. "And the drives? You're about 48 hours too late." "What are you talking about?" Nathaniel hissed, stepping forward. "I'm not a thief," I said, turning to address the room, ensuring every witness heard me. "I'm a whistleblower. Those drives aren't in my bag. They're currently being mirrored by the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the FBI. I spent my vacation in a secure room at the federal building, not a safe house." Harrison paled. The angry red of his sunburn turned a sickly, bruised purple. You signed those returns, Ava. You're going down with me." "Check the system, Father." I smiled, a cold, sharp expression. "I spent my last night in Manhattan fixing your mathematical errors. Every forged signature is now yours. Every offshore transfer is linked to your private biometric ID. I didn't just stop fixing your mistakes. I returned them to their rightful owner." "You traitor!" Nathaniel lunged at me, his face twisted in a snarl, but Teresa's security, real professionals, stepped in his way. "Touching me would be a very bad idea, Nathaniel," I said calmly. Tampering with a federal witness carries a mandatory minimum sentence. And considering the feds are likely at your Aspen villa right now, I'd suggest you save your energy for the arraignment. Just then, the sound of sirens began to wail from the street below, reflecting off the gallery's glass walls. Blue and red lights began to dance against the ceiling. Harrison looked at the door, then back at me. For a split second, I saw the man behind the curtain, small, terrified, and utterly powerless. The king of Manhattan was just a con artist whose luck had finally run out. "You destroyed the family," Harrison whispered, his voice cracking. "No," I replied, taking a slow sip of my champagne. "I just stopped pretending you were one." The gallery doors opened again, but this time it was men in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in gold on the back. As they moved toward Harrison and Nathaniel with handcuffs out, I didn't look away. I watched every second of their humiliation. I was no longer the servant. I was the architect of their ending. The aftermath of the gallery showdown was a whirlwind of legal filings, news headlines, and a silence that was finally peaceful. As Harrison and Nathaniel were led out in handcuffs, the Sterling Empire didn't just crumble. It evaporated. It turned out that when you build a skyscraper on a foundation of lies, all it takes is one person telling the truth to bring the whole thing down. 6 months later, I sat in a small, sun-drenched cafe in Sausalito, looking across the bay at the San Francisco skyline. The morning fog was lifting, revealing a world that felt brighter and sharper than the one I had left behind in Manhattan. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a news alert. Harrison Sterling and Nathaniel Thorne sentenced to 12 years for federal tax evasion and wire fraud. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I just felt a deep, resonant sense of closure. The investigation had been scorched earth. The feds had seized the Upper East Side penthouse, the Aspen villa, the private jets, and the offshore accounts I had pointed them toward. Chloe, who had spent her life mocking my plainness, was now living in a studio apartment in Queens, her designer bags sold at auction to pay for her father's mounting legal fees. She had called me once, screaming, accusing me of ruining her life. I had simply told her, "I didn't ruin your life, Chloe. I just stopped paying for it." Under the IRS whistleblower program, I was awarded 15% of the recovered taxes, a sum totaling $3.6 million. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't waiting for an allowance. I wasn't begging for scraps from a table I had built. I was free. I used a portion of the money to buy the very building Aunt Teresa's studio was in, ensuring she would never have to worry about a landlord again. We became partners, not out of family duty, but out of mutual respect. She taught me that family isn't the blood that betrays you. It's the people who honor your worth when you're at your lowest. One afternoon, Teresa found me in the office, staring at the final bank statement of the Sterling liquidation. "You okay?" she asked, setting a cup of tea on my desk. "I was just thinking about what Harrison said," I replied. "He said I was forgettable, that I was just the help." Teresa laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "He forgot the most important rule of power, Ava. The person who cleans up the mess is the only one who knows exactly how much dirt there is. He didn't realize that by making you invisible, he made you invincible." I looked out at the water. I wasn't the shadow CFO anymore. I was Ava. I had spent my life auditing the lives of others, fixing their broken ledgers and hiding their sins. Now, I was finally auditing my own life, and for the first time, the balance was perfect. Harrison was right about one thing. The ship did go down. But I wasn't the captain he tried to make me. I was the one who saw the iceberg coming, grabbed the only lifeboat, and rowed myself toward a shore where I could finally breathe. My name is Ava, and my books are finally clean. Don't let anyone take your kindness for granted. If they don't appreciate you, it's time to start living for yourself. Remember, you're worth so much more than they say. Stay strong. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the story, please hit like and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you soon.